mold is buried 3 feet underground, not stored, not stacked on shelves, buried, in a casting pit lined with brick, where it will remain for the next 72 hours while molten bronze, heated to 1,100 degrees Celsius, is poured directly into the earth. This is how bells have been made since medieval monks first discovered that certain shapes of metal could produce pure, sustained tones. This is Loughborough, Leicestershire. This is John Taylor and Company, the bell foundry that has operated continuously on this site since 1839. And after Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London closed in 2017, ending 450 years of operation, this became the last place in Britain where church bells are still cast entirely from scratch, using methods that would be recognizable to craftsmen from 5 centuries ago. The process takes 3 months per bell, sometimes longer, and every stage depends on knowledge that exists almost nowhere else. The foundry building itself is Grade 2 listed. Victorian brickwork, cast iron roof trusses, floors stained with centuries of bronze spillage. The casting pit, the underground chamber where molds are buried and metal is poured, was dug in 1859 and has been in continuous use ever since. It's 15 feet deep, brick-lined, accessible by steep stone steps worn smooth by generations of foundrymen carrying ladles of molten metal down into the earth. When you stand at the bottom and look up, you're looking at the same view apprentices saw in 1860. The same walls, the same air shaft, the same sense of working inside the ground rather than on top of it. A bell begins as a drawing, not a blueprint, a hand-drawn profile showing the exact curve of the bell's interior and exterior surfaces. This curve determines everything: the pitch, the fundamental note the bell will produce, the harmonics, the overtones that give each bell its distinctive character, the strike tone, the dominant sound, heard immediately after the clapper hits. If the curve is wrong by even a few millimeters, the bell won't ring true. It might sound flat or sharp or produce clashing harmonics that make the tone unpleasant. So the drawing is precise, calculated using formulas developed over centuries, adjusted based on the size of bell required, the weight of bronze available, and the acoustic properties desired by whoever commissioned it. Once the profile is finalized, the mold making begins. The core, the inner shape of the bell, is built first. Brick foundation, covered with a mixture of loam, a blend of clay, sand, horse manure, and chopped hay that's been used for bell casting since at least the 1400s. The loam is applied in layers, each one shaped to match the interior profile drawn earlier. Wooden templates, called crooks, are rotated around a central spindle to ensure the curve remains consistent as layer after layer is built up. The loam is left to dry, not in an oven, not with artificial heat, just time and air. Weeks sometimes, until the surface is hard enough to withstand the pressure of molten bronze without cracking. While the core dries, the false bell is made. This is a temporary outer layer applied over the core, shaped to match the exact exterior profile the finished bell will have. It's made from the same loam mixture, applied and shaped using the same rotating templates. Once dry, this false bell is covered with tallow, rendered animal fat, and then inscribed. Any text the bell will carry, any decorative patterns, any dates or dedications, all of this is carved into the tallow coating in reverse, because when the final mold is made, everything will be backwards. The cope, the outer mold, is built around the false bell. More loam, more layers, more drying time. When it's complete, the entire assembly is heated. The tallow melts and drains away, leaving a gap between the core and the cope. The false bell, now baked hard, is carefully broken apart and removed piece by piece. What remains is a hollow space, the exact shape of the bell, suspended between the inner core and the outer cope, ready to be filled with bronze. The mold is lowered into the casting pit, buried, secured, surrounded by packed earth to prevent it from shifting when 1,100-degree metal is poured inside. The furnace, a gas-fired crucible large enough to melt 2 tons of bronze, is brought to temperature. The bronze itself is a precise alloy, 77% copper, 23% tin, nothing else. Modern bell founders use the same ratio that medieval casters discovered through trial and error. Too much copper, and the bell becomes too soft, and the tone dies quickly. Too much tin, and it becomes brittle, prone to cracking. The balance has to be exact. When the bronze reaches 1,100 degrees Celsius, it glows. Not red, not orange. White, liquid light. The foundrymen work in teams, 2 people per ladle, because the weight and heat make solo handling impossible. They dip long-handled crucibles into the furnace, lift them carefully, and carry them to the edge of the casting pit. Then they pour. Molten bronze flowing into the earth, filling the buried mold, displacing air, creating a bell. The heat radiating from the pit is intense enough that you can't stand near it for more than a few seconds. The smell, metal, clay, burning organic material from the loam, is overwhelming, and the sound, the hiss of bronze meeting clay. The deep rumble as liquid metal settles into place. It's elemental, primal. Nothing about this process feels modern. The bell stays buried for 3 days, cooling slowly. If cooled too quickly, internal stresses develop, microscopic fractures that will eventually cause the bell to crack. So it sits, underground, wrapped in earth, returning to room temperature at its own pace. When it's finally lifted out, the mold is broken away. The bell emerges, rough, covered in casting residue, but recognizable. The tone, however, is not yet known. Because casting doesn't guarantee success, tuning happens next. The bell is mounted on a frame and struck. A tuning fork is used to identify the strike note and the harmonics. If they're off, and they usually are, slightly, material is removed from the interior surface. Not much. Fractions of a millimeter, shaved away with specialized tools. Each adjustment changes the pitch. Lower specific areas, and you affect specific harmonics. Lower the sound bow, the thickest part where the clapper strikes, and you change the strike note. This process can take days, weeks for large bells. It requires an ear trained to hear not just the dominant tone, but the overtones, the secondary frequencies that give the bell its character. Most people can't hear them. Trained bell tuners can isolate 5 or 6 distinct harmonics and adjust each one independently. The craftspeople doing this work learned it here, in this building, from people who learned it here decades earlier. There's no formal certification for bell founding, no university degree, no external training program. You learn by doing, by watching, by spending years in the foundry until the process becomes intuitive. Now, one of the senior founders started as an apprentice in 1978, 46 years ago. He's trained others since then, but not many. The work is physical, lifting molds, pouring molten bronze, breaking apart dried loam. The pay is modest, the hours are long, and the industry is small. How many new church bells does Britain need each year? Not many. When Whitechapel Bell Foundry closed in 2017, it shocked the bell founding world. 450 years of continuous operation. The oldest manufacturing company in Britain. The foundry that cast Big Ben, the Liberty Bell, and bells for cathedrals across the globe. Gone. Not because the quality had declined, not because demand had vanished entirely, but because maintaining a Grade 2 listed building in East London became economically unsustainable. The repairs required, estimated at over £8 million, simply couldn't be justified by the revenue from bell casting. So it closed, and John Taylor in Loughborough became, by default, the last. The only place in Britain still doing this work at full scale. There are small foundries, individual craftspeople casting handbells or decorative pieces. But for large church bells, the kind that require buried molds and 2-ton bronze pours, this is it. The foundry produces about 30 to 40 bells per year, not enough to be highly profitable, enough to survive. Commissions come from churches undergoing restoration, new church construction, rare, bell towers needing replacements, and occasionally international orders. But the market is limited, and it's not growing. Church attendance in Britain has been declining for decades. Fewer churches means fewer bells. Modern construction uses amplified recorded bells more often than cast bronze. And the cost, a single large bell can cost £50,000 or more, is prohibitive for many parishes. So the foundry adapts. They restore old bells. They offer tuning services. They diversify into architectural metalwork and heritage casting projects. But the core work, making new bells using medieval methods, is becoming rarer. Do traditional methods matter if the result could be achieved differently? Modern technology could cast bells faster, cheaper, more consistently. CNC machining could replace hand tuning. Computer modeling could eliminate the trial and error of mold making. But something would be lost. The bells made here don't just function. They carry the weight of a process unchanged across centuries. When you hear a Taylor bell ringing, you're hearing bronze shaped by methods a 15th century founder would recognize. That continuity matters, not for nostalgia, but because some knowledge is inseparable from how it's practiced. The most recent bell to leave the foundry is headed for a church in Devon. Tenor bell. E flat. Weight, 1,200 kilograms. It took 11 weeks from mold making to final tuning. The inscription reads, "Cast at Loughborough, 2024. When it's installed and rung for the first time, the sound will carry across the valley. People will hear it without knowing how it was made, without knowing it was buried in the earth before it emerged, without knowing that the methods used are the same ones that produced bells 500 years ago. And that's fine. Bells aren't meant to draw attention to their making, they're meant to ring. But the question remains, how long can this continue? The building needs maintenance, the equipment needs upkeep, the knowledge needs transfer, and all of that depends on there being enough work to sustain it. Right now, there is. Barely. But the margins are thin, and the future is uncertain. Skill survives in practice, but practice requires demand. And when demand fades, even centuries of continuity can end. Quietly, without ceremony. Just a foundry that stops casting, a pit that's filled in, a knowledge that becomes historical rather than living. Under this video, there's a subscribe button. It's a small action, but it helps document trades that are still alive, even if only barely. If craftsmanship still matters to you, if knowledge carried across centuries feels worth preserving, subscribing simply means you want these stories recorded while they still can be. And before you leave, tell us where you're watching from. Have you heard a church bell ring recently? Do you know where it was made? Are there traditional foundries near you? Share your experience below. That's how this knowledge stays visible.